You're listening to Unlocking Vulnerability, a podcast produced by Helen, helping you better understand consumer vulnerability. Hello, I'm Helen Pettifer, and welcome to Unlocking Vulnerability. In this episode, I'm delighted to welcome my special guest, Jayne Hawkes. Jayne lives in Gloucestershire and is a mystery shopping consultant and one of the top 5 consumer champions in the UK. And she's been featured in the Daily Mail and the Woman magazine. She's appeared on national TV and in Take a Break, Pick Me Up, Women's Own and The Sun as a consumer expert in columns and features, and is the go-to expert for a number of radio stations nationwide. In addition to all of that, Jayne is a guest author for both Which UK and Resolver UK. Wow, hello Jayne. A lot of information there. You're obviously out there quite a bit, so it's wonderful to have you on my podcast.
Oh, hello Helen, thank you. I don't know whether I can live up to that big list. It's quite a CV, isn't it, when you read it out like that?
It really is. It's fabulous, and it's a pleasure to have you on today's episode. So brilliant, thank you. Do you want to start by just giving a brief introduction to yourself? Obviously, I've covered a bit there, but tell us more.
As Jayne Hawkes, I'm Lady Jayne. I write the Lady Jayne blog. That's how I started doing what I'm doing. And I started to write because I was so exasperated by what I saw with falling standards in the UK today. We seem to be quite content with this tide of mediocrity that's going through. And I just felt that some things just aren't good enough and you need to speak out against them. Otherwise, they'll just get worse if nobody says anything. So I started to write the blog to give people a voice. Essentially on the blog, I champion the best of companies and I challenge the worst. So I support people in getting redress and refunds for any poor, shoddy service. But equally, I do, if I find a good company, then I will sing their praises from the hilltops.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I think we've seen a bit of sort of the unforgivable and the unforgettable. I think that seems to be a phrase at the moment through COVID, wasn't it? Those companies that we can forgive and those companies that we can quite happily forget.
Yeah, there's a real mix. There are some really, really good companies that have gone that extra mile and have really tried against all the odds. And then on the other side of the coin, you've got the ones that just haven't behaved and aren't playing fairly, and they're not really honouring what they should do to their customers, really.
You've also recently been crowned the Queen of Customer Service as Lady Jayne. That's a real accolade, so huge congratulations there. So tell us about that and how did it come about?
Well, that is super exciting. You're absolutely right. Obviously, it's down to my hard work and brilliance. I think that goes without saying.
Obviously.
But I did, when I first set out doing the blog and writing, I thought I would love to be the Queen of Customer Service. You know, if they associate my name with customer service, with mystery shopping, then that is me, and that is what I've achieved. And I think it's to do it. It's a lot of things. It's the way that the blog has progressed. It's also the support of Martin James, our friend Martin James, who is a consumer rights expert at Resolver. And I wrote an article for the Resolver UK website talking about how to take care of your employees in lockdown. And the programme, BBC Your Money in Your Life, was in conjunction with Resolver. So I think it's just getting my name out there as the months and the years have gone by. And hopefully now, that I'll be recognised. I'll be on the little Beeb database as a contact for anything else that comes up.
That's fantastic. And I did watch the episode and you were brilliant and came across really, really well. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
I know that you've got vast experience when it comes to customer service, especially from your time as an airline crew member. So obviously customer service has evolved. So how have you noticed that it's evolved, especially when it comes to identifying and supporting vulnerable customers?
Yeah, well, as you know, we're looking at now at a whole new vulnerable. So whoever was vulnerable before, already they remain, but now we've got a new breed coming into the mix because of the situation that we're in, whether that be financially, emotionally, through work, so professionally, etc. So we've got to have a broader range of understanding of what constitutes vulnerability. It's funny, going back to the airline days, I think we had to really understand the mentality of passengers and how and what happens when they enter the airport and get onto an aircraft. Because of course they, especially for people that like being in control, with a lot of business passengers, people, CEOs of their own businesses, but once they're in that tube, or once they're in the airport, they're not in control. They have to follow the directive of the crew and of the captain, and that's just the way in the airline's regulations. And sometimes that turns like normal, rational people into people that just can't cope. And therefore, you will have the build-up of emotions over something that really could be quite little, maybe just not having a choice of drink, and it could be a massive overload. So it's having, I think at the moment, that's the kind of scenario I'm thinking of in my head, that we're all kind of in that aircraft, in that airline tube, and whatever might be a small issue on a day-to-day basis has just become so big and it could burst at any time. So that little bit more awareness is so important, and you'd hope that through company policies, through training that they introduce, because they should be looking at more training now to deal with this new breed of vulnerability, then that they will be able to support their customers accordingly.
Yeah, I love that. I love that sort of coalition, or thinking about the airline and the airplane. That's I've never really thought about it in that way. So that's fab. So I expect you got lots of stories to tell from your airline days and customer stories.
Oh, they're fun. They're great, and they ask the most ridiculous questions, because it really just, I don't know what it does to to the mind, but it is just that mindset of being somewhere else, and then they may ask questions that they would never normally ask, and even the silliest things, like you ask like coffee or tea, and they'll say yes. And I know that we tend to we might do that as well, but you like kind of lose the basic responses that you've always been kind of accustomed to. But I do feel at the moment we're all in that little tube, because we don't have control, do we, over what's happening, and there are outside influences that we don't have a handle on, and that is particularly difficult. And I don't really know, it's the only time that we're going to be in a tube, isn't it? Because we can't actually travel, can't really go that far physically, but in this historical tube, that I think everyone needs to be aware of that now.
Yes, and then of course you throw in the fear of flying as well, and that just sort of really does escalate it as well.
Excellent point. Yeah, so if you've got the fear of flying on top of that, then yes, it's even worse. Or fear of heights, or whatever it may be.
Yeah,
it's something else to chuck into the mix, isn't it? Just to make things a little bit more difficult.
Exactly, fantastic. I'd love to hear your stories in the future. That would be brilliant.
Yeah, we'll do that. Airline chats.
That'd be brilliant. I know you don't mind me sharing with the listeners that you've got multiple sclerosis. So from a customer's point of view, how does this impact how you engage with organisations?
Yeah, well, obviously I've got two sides of the coin, haven't I? So I'm Jayne with MS as a customer, and also Jayne helping companies to understand customers with vulnerabilities who need support, who need certain help. If I look at me as a customer with multiple sclerosis, then I'm always looking to see if policies are in place, if there are ways of support that are already there, and that they appreciate that they know that there are disabilities and that they need to be aware of people's expectations and needs, really. When I go out, then I have to make sure, well, when I did go out, because obviously it's been a bit restricted recently, then you always have to make sure that facilities are on hand if I need them, etc. So clear signage, clear direction. And when I'm on the telephone, then actually, because I do suffer a little bit cognitively, which it makes it a bit difficult sometimes when I'm doing the consumer things, because I need to give advice quite quickly, need to think on my feet. And sometimes with MS, you do have that kind of mental block, and it is just like a fog, just for a second. So the time to process information is really important. And when companies properly listen, not just hear you, then it can make all the difference. And then from the other side of the coin, when I do speak to companies, I ask them, how do you know that such and such has an illness or disability? And what can you do to support them? Do you have anything in place? Because it's surprising, actually, the number that don't. They just have their normal regular policies.
Yes, yeah. And I think as well that it's raised an awareness that there are other vulnerabilities. I think a lot of organisations, when they think about vulnerability, they think about the elderly, they think about those with dementia, those with mental health conditions, financial challenges. I think sometimes they often overlook some of the more challenging, health and physical disabilities that people are facing, and how that impacts people's day-to-day lives and how they achieve tasks.
Yes, that otherwise it would be simpler. Yeah. And the majority of vulnerabilities are invisible, which makes it harder. It does mean it's more work for the companies involved, and it certainly is in today's climate. But if it's not something that's addressed, then it is a problem that will actually get worse, if exasperated, and we can't risk that, really.
No, and part of my job as training is to really sort of help organisations to look at all those other different vulnerabilities that they hadn't really considered. And you can see it in delegates' faces and their comments. I think, I'd never considered that actually might be impacting somebody when they engage with us as an organisation.
Yes.
So it's great to have that awareness and that sort of almost like the penny drops.
Yeah. Exactly that.
Yeah, fantastic. So you mentioned earlier that you've been on BBC Your Money and Your Life recently, and I watched that episode and it was great, and you talked about being better customers. So why is this currently more important than ever?
Well, this just links in nicely to what you just said, that we need to have more of an awareness than we've ever had before, and that's on both sides of the counter. So that's not just the company with you, that's you with them, because we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. We don't know how people are feeling. You could make or break somebody's day just as easily as they can break yours through something that you said. We don't know the financial difficulties someone's going through, the physical difficulties, emotional, mental, and they are things that would be hidden from us, especially if it's on a telephone, because you're not even going to be able to read their facial expressions and see them when they're speaking. And so we just need to be more mindful, kind, patient. We need to be polite. It really does not pay to be jumping up and down. I know sometimes it might help your own frustrations, but that's not really the way forward. The way forward with complaining is to be proactive, not reactive, and therefore you can hopefully get better results, because it may be at the moment as well that your problem that you have needs someone to go that extra mile for you, and needs them to do that little bit extra, and they can't do that if you are, they're not likely to want to do that if you're rude. So the way you approach it, and the little tip is to smile. So if you're really, really cross on you're really cross with the company, you're just about to ring up, then smile for about a minute beforehand. It just makes you sound softer, even if you're still fuming underneath. But because we are all in the same storm, we may be in different boats, but we're in the same storm. We've really got to pull together and work together to get through this, and particularly in light of what we've discussed is that we have this whole new vulnerability, a whole new strain of vulnerability coming through, all kinds of people, all kinds of pressures, and you need to be working from both sides of the counter in order to understand and to move forward to the future, really have a future relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, customers need to really remember that the organisations that they're engaging with, the people from these organisations, the people on the telephones, are having these conversations in their own home. So they're not even in an office where they've got that support network. They're having these conversations in their spare bedroom or down at the dining room table with their family and other things going on around them as well. So they're working under extreme circumstances. Is really helpful, I think, for us as customers to really remember that.
Yes, we need to be really aware at the moment of the current circumstances, aware that they could be working at home, that there could be other distractions, that this is going to make it difficult to interlink between departments as well. So that the normal links that you've got within your company structure are going to be a lot more difficult. It might be harder to get in touch with who you need to. It might take longer to get in touch with that person, and that's frustrating. It's also quite isolating, as you said, because you don't have that contact within your company that you can readily call upon. I was actually speaking to a friend quite recently that he's worried about going back into the workplace because she feels that the cogs of her unit, of her company, they're so used to just not being together like they were in the office. And she said, well, what do we do now? Because it'd be like starting again. It'd be like starting a new job. And she's actually developed a little bit of anxiety. So that is a vulnerability. That is something that's going to make her maybe doubtful of her own ability and lose confidence in those initial days back at work. So yeah, it really is important to be mindful in all respects.
Really, really important point. Thank you, Jayne. So again, thinking about the current pandemic situation, then thinking about the organisations that you've seen and you've been reading about and you've been engaging with, in what ways can organisations better support their vulnerable customers moving forward?
Well, obviously with the advent of technology, you'd think it was easier to be able to keep a record of various vulnerabilities, the more obvious ones that you'd record, because the initial problem with the supermarkets is they didn't have that information. So when lockdown hit and everyone had to sign up to be vulnerable, no one could get through. They just had one telephone line, whereas maybe a simple box created on a website actually might have been a bit quicker, even if it probably crashed every other day. But now they do have that information. So what they should have had that before. So it's having that database of information, it's having it to draw on if they need it, and having particular dedicated lines for certain things that they can now support. Because what they should have are measures in line should this happen again. Obviously we've got everything crossed that we won't see a second spike. Should it happen again, then they should at least have all those details to be able to identify their vulnerable customers quickly. Also to have clear policies in place that are obvious to the customer. It's all very well the company going, oh, well, you need to do this X, Y, and Z, but the customer should be able to do that directly. If they need special assistance, there should be an easy way and a directed way of getting that assistance. So I think it's all about making things really transparent, really clear, and keeping the conversation going. I think what's lost, particularly we've just been talking about like losing communication within your workplace, we've got to keep that communication going with that in a completely different way, which is unnerving, I think, for quite a lot of people. Let's just fingers crossed that we can all move forward and go into a whole new communication stream at some point, which will improve the situation.
Yes, exactly. And sort of organisations aren't then in fear of GDPR processes as well. I think that's often the uncertainty with GDPR and whether they're able to do what they want to do sometimes holds companies back from actually recording data and sort of using it the company's best interests and the customer's best interests.
Yes, because some are a little bit anxious at the moment about the fact you've got to keep the data for 21 days of customers that visit restaurants, etc. But obviously they have to do that. And as a customer, you need to know that they're going to do that, because if you do go and you have been in the same environment as someone with COVID, then you do need to know about it and you need that reassurance. It's all about building that reassurance, building that confidence to be able to go back in to restaurants, to shops, and keep those industries thriving. Because if we don't, then it's kind of use it or lose it. But of course, on the other side of the coin, we're all very much aware of how difficult that is. But if the support's there and the confidence is there and you trust in those establishments, then hopefully that will come.
And again, I think with all of customer service, it really does come down to trust, doesn't it? Trust is a key word, I think, when customers engage with organisations and share information, and not just personal information, but also sort of information about their vulnerabilities.
Yes.
Sort of coming back to the vulnerabilities. People will only really share that they have certain situations or circumstances that they're facing with an organisation that they fully trust.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Definitely.
Well, I mean, that's sort of all of my questions I wanted to cover today, and it's gone really quickly, Jane. So thanks ever so much. Are there any final thoughts that you want to share with the listeners today?
Well, I'm really pleased. Thank you so much for inviting me on, because I think this is a time when we do need to look at life in a different way and look at the way that we are with other people in a different way. And from a consumer perspective, then we need to adjust our customer service expectations accordingly as to what is reasonable in this time and reasonable behaviour in this time. So that's from the customer point of view. But from companies' point of view, then they have to, even however difficult it is, they have to understand that the customer that they're normally speaking to is now one in that tube. The tube that we talked about earlier, the aircraft tube, and they are going to be really just bouncing off the walls, and they may not have another outlet apart from to speak to you. So it has to be a kind of a bit of give and take goes a long way. It has to be a conversation, and I think understanding, investing in training to understand vulnerabilities is more important than ever. And we are going to go, I think, from this current crisis that we're in, we are going to be moving into more mental health problems further down the line as more people maybe are made redundant. They come out of furlough, bit like I said about my friend that's worried and anxious about going back to work. So there needs to be an awful lot of support, and that's mutual support, isn't it, and guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some really key points there, Jane. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being my guest today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you.
Oh, I've loved it. Thank you.
No, you're very welcome. So if you've got any questions or comments about today's conversations, then please do get in touch with either Jane or myself. You can email me at info@helenpettifer.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Unlocking Vulnerability. Please take care of yourself and stay safe and well. Remember to subscribe to my podcast and leave a review. You can also follow me on Twitter at @HPettiferTrain. And I look forward to you joining me on my next episode.